Oh, you have to say yes to it, I think. And welcome to Leading to Team. I'm Freeman Michaels, and I'm here today to have a conversation with my new friend, Wade Chumney, who has written a book called Conscious Business Ethics. And I'm just going to warn everyone that Wade and I can really get going. This is a conversation that he loves and that I love. So I have so many things that I want to talk about, and I know we're going to get going here. So first of all, Wade, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate that. This is really nice.
I love your book. And so here's one of the things I love about your book, and I'm going to start sort of at the beginning. I love that you include your college essay from like 30 years ago, right? And I love that it's still relevant. And then what's crazy to me is that you sort of have these two archetypal figures, these two popular, icons in our culture that you sort of use as aspects of you to reflect who you are, what your values are, and so forth. But what I love in the book is that you correlate that with Plato's theory of the transcendent nature of life 30 years later, and you can kind of see the through line. So I want to start by talking about this. The idea that this is still relevant, again, blows me away. And the idea that there's a progression in your own process that you can point to from when you were 18. So do you want to start off by talking about that?
Oh, sure. That's a great point. Thanks for bringing it up. But yeah, so I put my college essay in there in the sense that I wanted to demonstrate to people the practical nature of this material. It's called Conscious Business Ethics, the Practical Guide to Wisdom. And I'm trying to demonstrate to individuals that, me, you, each of us are capable of doing this. And I just wanted to show like a snapshot of, hey, when I was 18, I didn't know what was going on. I grew up in a little town called Hanahan, South Carolina, lived in the same house my whole life, first person in my family to graduate from college. I didn't know what I was doing necessarily, but
you didn't just graduate from college. You graduated from college. You graduated from law school at UVA. You've got a couple master's degrees. I mean, you kind of took that one to the nth degree, right?
Yeah, I took it because I knew knowledge was, important to find out what's going on, especially if you find out important things and understand how they relate to other things. But that, the college essay was just an attempt to show, where I was at that age and how I'm just like anybody else. You're just like me. We're all the same. So if I can see these things at that point in my life and they don't come into fruition until later when I tie them into Plato and his ideals, that again, it's something that immediately any of us are capable of.
Do you mind revealing the two characters that you chose? Because it's fantastic. It's fun, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was just where I was at that point in my life.
Sure.
I was 18. I was getting ready to go to college again for the first, in my family, the first one. And I was just, what reflects me? How do I describe myself? And the two people I looked upon that had an influence upon my development were David Letterman, who was a very popular late night talk show host at that time. And his comedic value, his sense of humor, I always thought that was important in life, to engage it as a fun activity, right? Life is not boring. Life is not static. Life is engaging. Life is fun. If you can do that with life, you win, I think. That's kind of the bottom line.
And that he's just a regular guy, but it was his insights. It was the way that he viewed the world that made him special. And that was what you were attracted to. All right, that's one of them. What's the other one?
That's exactly right. It's the way he saw things, and that I related to. And then the other one was Carl Sagan, which sounds very different right out of nowhere. But this is where I was really into quantum theory, and I still am, and science and how the world worked. And Carl Sagan framed the universe in a way with humanity at the center of it that really resonated with me. And it wasn't just this cold, mechanical, scientific nature. It was human beings are precious. This planet is precious, and we're all part of it. And then how do we work together to, make the world more ideal? And it was a really powerful message that he had, and something that really struck with me. And I resonated with his work.
I love it. So a big part of your book and your theory is kind of a know your why thing, right? There's a deliberateness or an intentionality in the business ethics perspective, right? So yeah. I want to start with this knowing your why, and I don't know. Hopefully this isn't like a curveball. why? So why are you talking to me today? What's your why for wanting to have this conversation? And I'll be a little specific. You and I are talking about the correlation between operating as a team organizationally and orienting from your perspective around business ethics. So yes, there's compliance. Yes, there maybe is sexual harassment training or the things you're required to do and rules with business. But okay, great. What's underneath the rules? What are the ethics that actually are more grounding and cohesive and have greater meaning than just following the rules? So you and I are having a similar conversation. So I'm curious, what's your why in terms of this conversation?
Well, that's a great question, and maybe the most important question you could ever ask anyone. And whenever I teach my class at the beginning of the semester, I always start off with asking them, "Why are you sitting here?" There's a section in the book on this. What are you doing here? And they'll say, "Well, I need this class to graduate." Like, okay, well, why do you want to graduate? Because there's always a why behind the why.
Right.
And the reason they give there is, well, I want to get a good job. Why do you want the good job? And they start, oh, there's deeper whys behind everything I say. And they ultimately get to a point of where they want to have a good life and be able to provide for their family. That's generally where things tend to end up. And what I find fascinating is that's the same answer that's been given going back 2,500 years for mankind, for humanity, for society. We're no different today in our human nature as we were back then. And that why is that I started to realize that business ethics as a field is of critical import. Ethics is how you choose to live your life. And business is a context within a subset of the context of your life. So it's something you spend your time doing, but you spend your time doing other things as well throughout your life. So as I dug into this stuff and I tried to do my job as best I can, and I started to realize there's certain principles here that are really valuable that you can actually take and make your life better. This isn't just a theoretical construct that you can throw around. So the why behind writing this book is that over the years, I've taught this material and transformed it and made it better because of my excellent students who engage me, who ask questions, who are motivated and driven. And that feedback has allowed me to create this book. And I continue to get feedback from them about how valuable it is and how much of a difference it makes in their lives and how they use it years later. And I'm like, well, this is something that deserves to be shared, beyond the classroom. So this is my first attempt to share this data I've put together with everyone else that's out there who has any desire to try to seek wisdom, to try to figure out how to live a better life and how to enjoy the experience, because that's kind of the goal that I'm coming from with this why.
Yeah, so a couple things just for the audience. So Wade teaches at California State University, Northridge, where he's created his own program that's unique within the School of Business. Previously at Georgia Tech, where he cut his teeth, as it were, in this same genre or same realm. Okay, so this is good. So one of the things you're talking about is helping these college students dig a little deeper to find a deeper why that correlates to why business ethics or ethics in general matter to them. That seems to be a pretty tall task, but it seems to me what might be the taller task is how do you convince or how do you draw out in, let's say, a CEO of a business, why business ethics is important, A, to him, and B, to train his entire company or organization in?
Well, that's a great question. And I think from an educational perspective, when I'm talking about business ethics and I teach it, and I've taught it for almost 20 years now, what is neglected is the you. You hear business and you hear ethics, but you don't hear the word you in there. And it's always an external thing, an external practice, an external type of action you take, where in reality, you, the internal component behind this perception you have of what's going on in your life, your brain, your heart, your your senses, all these things are of great importance because they, result in what happens out there in the world. So to turn that mirror onto yourself and self-reflect and really think about what values are you operating under? What is your reason for doing anything? Why do you take the action you take? And if you really start to think about that and dig down, you get to that same place of, wow, there's certain components. I'm a system, I've got certain components I can work on. And if I do so, I can have a more ideal life experience. And that's what I think any CEO, any student, any regular person would find value in the teachings that I put in this book.
So what's brilliant about that is you're pointing to systems thinking, because that's kind of the next piece of the puzzle, right? So it's the individual you, what's important to you, but then as you pull back the lens, as it were, and I know you use lens in the book, to see the systems thinking, you start to see this as expanding into, okay, where is I, the me, the you, connecting to other people, and where does it connect to what the business does, and where do we start to see ourselves in this larger system? Can you, for our audience, correlate the systems thinking? I may have just done it, but I mean, I know you have more to say about it. So
Yeah, that's
weave
great.
in the systems thinking piece here for me.
Yeah, so in the text, I talk about three different angles. I talk about the angle of psychology, which focuses on you, on your inside, your actions and intentions. I talk about the angle of philosophy, which is kind of virtue, these principles that undergird the world, as Plato would say, and finding those and putting them into practice. And then I also talk about systems, the external world that you find yourself in, the business world when you're in that context, right? And that's where systems thinking comes in, you know? And the thing about systems is you go from a place where everything is an isolated object. You move to relationships between those objects and yourself. You go on to patterns that form where you see these things repeating over time. Then you get to the system itself, which is operating as is. You're a system, I'm a system, we all have a system, an organization is a system. But then, pursuant to the research, as you go deeper, you start to realize there's principles that undergird every system, because every system is part of a larger system. So, you know, organizations are part of society. That's the larger system within in which it's constructed. And it's dependent, it's interdependent, in fact, which is the highest level you can get to, the realization that we're all interconnected, that the actions I take affect the things that happen to you, and vice versa. And so then, therefore, the team concept, you realize, is of primary importance. It's about this separation from egoistic selfishness to team and selflessness, this realization that as a group, you know, we are stronger, we are smarter, we are better off than we are separated on our own, isolated, trying to operate in this world. And that's the ideal toward which you should strive.
I love it. So also in this whole concept of sort of going deeper, but also moving wider sort of simultaneously, I want to talk about the difference between synthesis and analysis as it relates to the whole, right? And how you determine the function or dysfunction, in this case, perhaps, of an organization or a company in terms of how we shift from just, because a lot of companies are big into their data analysis, but the game is won or lost. I don't want to put this on you, but from what I get from your perspective, it's won or lost at the synthesis level. So just want you, for our audience, to explain the difference between analysis and synthesis.
That's a brilliant point. And you can understand that at the systems level. With analysis, you know, and Russell Lakoff was the proponent, big founder of systems thinking. And, you know, he talked about this difference between analysis and synthesis. And we are trained, we have habituated patterns in our mind to focus on analysis, to break things down, atomic parts. That's Western culture. We atomize things. We see them as separate, and we look at individual objects and study those things. And then we try to build up from there. Okay, that's the atomistic way of approaching things. The alternative, the synthesis, is to realize that each of these little components is part of a larger systems. They are synthesized together. That's why you have the concept of synergy, where the output of a system is greater than the sum of its parts. It's not magic, it's how the world works. So once you realize that's the team concept, that the synthesis of bringing things together, of realizing the connection to the larger system of which you're a part, our planet, for instance, and realize, you know, just like I'm a system, I've got bodily components within me operating, keeping me alive, as do you and everyone else. Well, beyond us, we're part of this larger system on the external side. And to synthesize is to realize, how does my system fit into this larger system, and how do I make that more ideal? Because the more ideal I make it, the more things are going to flow in life, the more it's going to make sense, and the better it's going to work. If you're constantly butting up against a larger system, you will not win. You cannot win against a larger system. It will overpower you.
Yeah, so again, you've pointed to something really important. Again, it's a kind of going deeper and going wider, that the analysis often, and we see this with data collection, that it's done in this sort of narrow perspective, and then it's interpreted in a way that misses the larger context, and thereby companies make mistakes or whatever. One of the things I think is most important, so for example, when people join a company and they're onboarded, they go through, I don't know, sexual harassment training, let's say. and that kind of represents the rules. Kind of like, again, the analysis, this is the data points. So you have this really small understanding of here are the 20, 50, 100 rules you have to follow. Here, memorize these rules and regurgitate them. Your background is in law. You have your degree from University of Virginia. I made that point earlier. And so there's this whole way that there's the law or the rules where, and then there's the principle and the ethics. And so can you, for our audience, just because you've kind of done it in this way of understanding how analysis becomes synthesis. Can you help us make the same correlation or similar correlation between the rules, as it were, and how that's a short circuit of this larger conversation that'll actually be better off, the company will be better off if they do the deeper work, which is the ethics conversation?
Absolutely. And this struck me, as I'm teaching over the years and trying to do my best and really figure out the field and how to teach it effectively, you start to realize that laws and rules and regulations, they're there. They kind of set a benchmark, but it's human nature, whether or not you abide by that rule is your choice, and it depends on where you're coming from. So if a rule's in place, you may try to get it, but you may try to weasel around it and figure out little nooks and crannies. That's what human nature does if they look at it as a rule that opposes their nature and what they want to accomplish. Okay, that's how human nature works. On the other side, you've got, if you have an ethical underpinning, a foundation, then the rule is not there to impede you. It's simply a guide to remind you of, why it makes sense to do the right thing, to create, come from a good place. So the rules, you don't even need the rules necessarily because you're operating from that perspective your whole life. And the rules are there just there to remind, oh, okay, yeah, that's there. Of course I'm doing that because I'm coming from the right place and I care about my fellow human beings. I want to do good. I want to make the world a better place. And if you engage the world in that manner, the rules are secondary. The laws are, again, just reminders. They're not the foundational underpinning for why you take certain actions. And I don't think they ever really are, because what really is the human, your value, your power of reason and how you choose to engage the world. That's really where your actions are coming from. And the rules, some people see as impeding that if you're coming from the wrong place.
Yeah, I think this is where companies make a big mistake, is they check the box of, oh yeah, we did the compliance training. Oh yeah, we did the diversity, equity, inclusion training. Oh yeah, we did the sexual harassment training, but they're not correlating the sort of deeper values and principles. And it's not lived out organizationally in other areas. In fact, you see it's kind of like schizoid, where in one breath they talk about how important these are things, and the next moment they're behaving in a way that might be unethical, or it's usually one of those things where it's in that gray area, which always points to, okay, wait a minute, what's the deeper sense of ethics, principles, values? But I don't think a lot of companies do the heavy lifting, and that's kind of what we're talking about here.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that it's more effort, it's more fundamental change to undergo this focus upon principles. But once the key, and the reason I teach it in class and what I got to have people click, is the realization that operating on those values, on those principles, makes your life better. It makes you enjoy your experience of life better. It's not, and not only that, it's better for everyone else around you. It's a true win-win. And
yeah, it's a key to sustainability. I mean, a lot of companies, they miss that. And then, we're seeing it everywhere. I've been watching all of these. I've been watching Dope Sick. I've been watching, Dropout, which is the one about that company that had the blood thing. I've been watching, we have the short, whatever the movie was that won Academy Awards about how the shorting of all these ways of, the WeWork one, that's another one. We're like watching all these people be so short-sighted because it's not grounded in anything, right? It's again just the, well, here are the rules. Well, how do we bend the rules? As opposed to what's the foundational meaning behind the rules so that we can live into them. And then the upside, it extends way beyond just the ability to not get thrown in jail. It actually means your company is building something that's viable and sustainable, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that it's that foundation, you use the word, the underpinning, the undergird, that's what provides you with the peace of mind that we all seek. We all want peace of mind. We don't want thoughts just racing through our head. And when you're not grounded, when you have no true purpose other than to benefit yourself, if, selfishly speaking, you're just running from one thing to the next and you've never satisfied. You can gain more material wealth, you can gain a higher job status, And those things are ephemeral. The only thing certain in life is that things will change. That will come, that will go, make it bigger, make it less. Either way, if you attach to it, you lose. I mean, you can't control those things necessarily, but you can control your character. You know, there was a great quote, I can't remember the philosopher who said it, but your character is your destiny.
Mm,
That is,
love
who you are determines what your future will be, period. And that's a true statement. So if you have that foundation, that undergirding, that sustainable practice that you bring to bear in all your interactions in whatever context you find yourself, including business, you win. Your life is a better experience, and those around you win as well.
Brilliant. Last thing I want to talk about. So in the book, you talk about this sort of developmental viewpoint, right? You take Plato's allegory of the cave, you take Acuff's system learning sort of stages, Kohlberg's theory of moral development, those stages. So there's this developmental viewpoint. In other words, we're not making the lower levels of development wrong. We're just recognizing there's a trajectory towards growth. And it's an interesting correlation. I mean, my perspective is I love that you go all the way back to Plato so that you can see the through line, if you will, in just human development, you know, and then moral development and then systems thinking development. So we start to see this map, if you will, that's been true over time. It's just here you're laying out in a way that, again, makes the case for why business ethics are so important, not just for the individual, but for organizations. Can you speak to, again, tying in these various, again, I'm calling developmental processes to illustrate how one goes on this journey and why one goes on this journey?
Absolutely. And that's a great question. And this is the fundamental core of the text. And what you see, you realize over time, is that Plato, nearly 2,500 years ago, came up with his allegory of the cave, which in my opinion is probably one of the greatest writings in Western history. It's unbelievable the layers and the levels he goes into to explain human nature. And the thing to realize about what he's doing is he's talking about the nature of education. He's saying that for you, for me, for any of us in our life, what should we learn more than anything? If we've got this reasoning mind, what should we fill it with? What would we focus our attention on and our intention toward in order to live a more ideal life? That's what he was writing about in his allegory of the cave. And in his explanation toward the end, he's asked, well, how do you achieve this? And his answer is the virtues. You put the virtues into practice, okay? And there's only 4 he gave and 6 in positive psychology they gave to put into practice. That's what I love. It's not ultimately complicated. It's very simple. And you just have to pay attention to these things. And what I do in the text is I link these to the system of yourself, you know, your body, your mind, your heart, show you which ones you can control, where the virtues fit in that, and how to have a more ideal life. And you're talking about the integration of these 3 perspectives. Well, Plato in philosophy is, you know, almost 2,500 years ago. He's the foundation. From philosophy, all our sciences sprang. Everything came from that. You need to understand that's the font of knowledge. And over time, psychology developed out of that, systems thinking developed out of philosophy. So this is the undergirding component. But with take the aspect of systems thinking that we just talked about, you know, that's a component that has 7 levels, as I interpret them in the book, that correlate with Plato's 7 levels of getting out of the cave. Furthermore, the science of psychology, me and you, our actions and our intentions, there's 7 levels there that Kohlberg studied for moral development and how we develop ourselves. So what I've come to the realization is that each of these different perspectives are talking about the same thing. They're talking about these developmental stages that you must go through step by step, stage by stage. They're laid out there. And once you realize that, you come to the realization that you don't know what you don't know. There's things out there you truly don't know because you've never experienced them. So as you progress through these stages, as you intend to work on yourself, you come to know more and more. And those things you used to not know, now you do. And you can see why they're important, why they're valuable. So if you're sitting there thinking, well, what does any of this matter? You don't know what you don't know. All of us do. But as you dive into the material, what's most important is you take your intention and you really want to strive toward the ideal. You focus your attention upon those things that will help you get there. And then that's what's going to help you focus and get through these stages to ultimately get a place of interdependence, a place of team, a place of selflessness, away from the selfishness, from the egoistic, you know, perspective of me, that kind of dominates our culture today. you're much better off, you're much happier getting to that 7th stage or anywhere closer to it than you are staying down there at the bottom, which is based upon fear, which is probably the primary motivator of most of our actions in the world today. So it's fascinating to me that those 3 things correlated in a triangle, is my favorite shape is. And I think it's something that's really beneficial to help people understand how to live a better life, head toward the ideal.
And the idea that we can see the same thing from these various different perspectives, right? And it's throughout
Yeah.
history. It's not newer news. It's like the story has been told 2,500 years ago with Plato and then retold in various different iterations,
Yeah.
which is what I love most about the book, right? You call it a practical guide to wisdom. And you think business ethics, practical guide to wisdom, how do those correlate? But obviously, once you read the book, you're like, of course they correlate. So, whether someone's reading, some sort of spiritual text, or they're reading some kind of personal development text, or wherever they're coming from, or they just want to get it right in business, their leadership is their perspective, or in my case, team building. Everyone can see that, oh my gosh, there's this through line of this development that each human being has the opportunity to go through. And business ethics is absolutely one of those things that people should consider, especially if they're in business or they're a business student and learning about business and want to go into business. Because again, it's one of those things that's sort of neglected at one's own peril, individually and then collectively, in terms of the viability of the business. And of course, we're seeing that reflected in all of those documentaries I was mentioning, or shows I was mentioning. So I want to thank you for taking the time with me. I love the book. I love what you do. I'm excited about what we might do together. And so it's beautiful that we had this opportunity to hang out and talk about business ethics.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Freeman. This was a wonderful conversation. I always enjoy our conversations together.
Always good. All right. Thanks so much. And thank you all for listening to this Leading to Team conversation. We hope you come back again.
All right. Thank